Now from South Asia to Africa, many women are standing up against sexual violence. Recent gang rapes in New Delhi and Gurdaspur in northern India and South Africa have sparked protests and condemnation around the world. Another country in Africa where gang rape is happening also too often is Egypt, where human rights groups say mobs are targeting women at a shocking rate. VOA's Elizabeth Arrett has more for us from Cairo.
Women have been central to Egypt's revolution, from the uprising 2 years ago through protests against current President Mohamed Morsi. They've been on the front lines, but in recent weeks they've faced a different, rising danger. Mob sexual violence against female protesters has skyrocketed in the past month, with at least 19 attacks reported on Tahrir Square in one day alone. As in this video, the victim is encircled by a group of men. The men rip off the women's clothes and violate them with hands, sticks, and, in at least one case, a blade. Women have rallied in protest, demanding the president investigate and bring those responsible to justice. Sexual attacks have been long endemic in Egypt, with many women reporting frequent harassment just going about their lives. Women can find it bewildering.
When I go in the street and found something hit me or touch my body, what are they think about? How they could do that?
The mob attacks of Tahrir have brought up even darker questions and accusations that the violence is not just gender-based, but political. Rights advocate Nita Evele.
There were aggressive actions against civilians in an organized and pre-planned way to empty the squares and scare the opposition and send messages to society so that they are scared to express their opinion.
Activists point out there have been no reports of mob attacks at pro-government rallies.
So who made him?
Political analyst Saeed Sadek says the practice goes back years.
This is a culture that thinks that humiliating people sexually will deter them from being active politically. So this is what is being done. And nobody gets arrested despite the fact that you have videotapes of people who did it.
While a culture of impunity is not new, the spike in attacks has raised pressure on President Morsi and other Islamist leaders to clearly denounce the violence and work to prevent it. Psychologist Farah Shash.
The people will be pushing for laws to be applied and for laws to be in the parliament that would stop these kinds of actions, whether sexual harassment, sexual violence, or any kind of violence taking place.
In the meantime, and despite the dangers, many Egyptian women remain undeterred. Elizabeth Arrett, VOA News, Cairo.
Well, joining me now to talk about this rise in sex attacks are Nita Evele, the director of Congo Global Action, based here in Washington. And then also during the segment, we are going to be joined via Skype from Pretoria by Rachel Jewkes, the director of South Africa's Medical Research Council's Gender and Research Unit. So I'll start off with you, Ms. Evele. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I just wonder what you think when you hear about the extent of rape, in particular what we just profiled in Egypt, and knowing what is happening in the DRC. What comparisons do you draw?
It's like a plague now. I mean, it's maybe because we're hearing about it because of the technology, but now you hear the same events happening everywhere where women are always attacked when there's a revolution, when there's a war, when there's any kind of trouble. Women are the first to pay for it. And that's why we're saying that people have to tie those kind of violence with criminality, but extreme criminality, to make it stop, because women are part of a society. They're even more than part of the society. In a community like the DRC, women are the breadwinner most of the time. By attacking the women, you are destroying an entire community and pretty much the economy of an entire country. So all those governments and all those people have to take this in consideration and make a big effort to eradicate those kind of violence that really go to the core of dignity and respect and all, and only the people's soul, because it really go to everybody's. The whole community suffer tremendously when a woman is attacked.
But in the case of the DRC, that has been the objective, right? To kill communities.
Absolutely.
And their whole intention is to use women as weapons of war.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why we're saying, and it looks like other criminals and other rebels around the world are copying the same tactics, because when it started in the DRC, it started in Rwanda also during the genocide. People were silent about it, and we've been saying to the people, do not cannot let this type of criminality continue, because then it's going to spread all over the world, and we're seeing it spreading. It's becoming normal, yeah.
And I want to come to you, Dr. Jewkes, out there in South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, when you hear about the gang rape cases in South Africa, in India, where there's clearly no war or any kind of conflict like is happening in the DRC, and you hear that South Africa has one of the highest rates of sexual violence against women, what do you make of this upsurge?
Well, it's definitely not a case of rape being used as a weapon in South Africa. We have done research with men where we've asked them about why they've raped. And what we see is that actually it's really profoundly rooted in a sense of sexual entitlement and the gender inequality that permeates our society. And there's this idea, particularly prevalent amongst young men, that basically if they can get away with something like rape, then it's legitimate for them to do it. And if the woman's, you know, so stupid to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and get raped, then she is the one who will end up being blamed for that and not them.
But now, so you know, fact, Dr. Jewkes, sorry to cut in, when you hear of the cases like what happened in India, and specifically the two ladies, at least an incident that happened in December and one just last month in January, these women were on the bus. They were on their way home or from school. In South Africa, the case of the young 17-year-old, she was, I guess, on her way home from school. So it's not as though these women are necessarily seeking trouble. And, you know, just pegging onto the survey you just mentioned, very disturbing statistics talking about how 37% of men say that they've raped at least a child or a woman in their lifetime, and that they don't, 62% of the surveyed boys over 11 say sex or rape is not a violent crime.
Yes, if you will just let me finish. What I wanted to say is that our research in South Africa shows that men rape out of a sense of sexual entitlement. They target women who are available to rape. And if you look at the woman who was on the bus, it was a setup. Those men were out for what they saw as fun for that evening. It was recreation for them to trap that woman and her boyfriend on the bus. And if it hadn't been them, it was very clear they would have trapped somebody else. And there was a strong suspicion that they probably had done it before. And that's what we see in South Africa. It's that in many cases, rape is seen as sport for boys. Otherwise, you know, if boys or young men are bored and they want to, you know, very often they see it as being something, well, I feel like having sex, so I'll go and see if I can find a woman who I can have sex with. And so we see that very much as a motivation. In the case, the very brutal gang rape that's just happened in South Africa, the rape was clearly an act of punishment by the boyfriend. And again, that stems from this kind of horrible sense of sexual entitlement and sort of dominance, and the use of rape as a tool of dominance over women by men. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that that women are to blame for rape. Women are in no way to blame for rape. The people who are to blame for rape are the men who do it. Mm-hmm. But this is what our society does. Rape is very heavily stigmatized. It's the only form of violence and crime that is ever blamed on the victim before it is blamed on the perpetrator. And that's what people say. You know, when a woman's raped, they say, why were you drunk? Why were you out? Didn't you know it was dangerous to get on a bus like that? What were you wearing? Right. Why did you go with a man like that? But they never, ever turn around to men and say, you know what, you're accountable.
Now, Dr. Jewkes, I just want to bring it back to the studio to Nita Evele, who has been covering and reporting a lot about what's happening in the DRC. What has been the excuse that men have been using for raping women there? Because basically they hunt them down.
Absolutely. We heard everything. We heard, like the doctor said, it's their fault, what they were wearing. They're enticing the men to rape them. But we found out in DRC, the women, even 84-year-old women were raped, and even babies were raped. So that excuse really make no sense. But also, even here in United States and elsewhere, you hear people saying it's a culture. I mean, that's one part that I don't understand. Why is the expert who calls something which is a crime, call it a culture? No culture will tolerate something like that. It may be that because justice never been brought forward, or maybe they've been doing it for so long and they never had consequences. That's why they continue doing it. But calling it culture actually make it simplistic and really actually making it okay to do it because it's part of their livelihood.
Dr. Jewkes, just for a few seconds, if you could address the issue of at least penalty for people who do commit this crime, and then especially when you're looking at it for most of these boys or men who don't feel or see it as a crime in the first place.
Yes, I mean, if you get convicted of rape in South Africa, there is a mandatory 15-year sentence unless you can plead mitigating circumstances. But that's not really the point. The point is that of every 100 women who report rape to the police, only 6% see their perpetrator convicted at all. And probably only about 1 in 25 women do report rape to the police who are raped. So that basically the proportion of men who experience any penalty for rape is extremely small. And we know that very often women bear the brunt of community sanctions. We know in rural areas women be driven from their homes when they report men who are more powerful who rape them to the police. So there's a very severe problem with penalties.
Dr. Jewkes, thank you so much. We appreciate that. And I know, Ms. Evele, there's a lot you could tell us about the rate of convictions, which I know is very low, about what happened in the DRC, but we'll have you back and we can talk about later. So we were joined by Nita Evele, who's the Director of Congo Global Action, based here in Washington, and Dr. Rachel Jewkes, the Director of South African Medical Research Council's Gender and Research Unit, and she joined us via Skype from Pretoria in South Africa. Now, next month, Africans living in the U.S. can join a march for Congo women and children in Atlanta, Georgia. You'll find the time and place on our Facebook page.